All right, let's talk about bats. Um, we have a lot of bats in Montana. Most of our bats are migratory. However, we do have some bats from Canada that come down and winter here. This is south for them. The problem that we usually have with bats is when they get into an area and their numbers increase so much that you have problems with guano or urine or sometimes just the sheer numbers and the noise. But guano can really be a problem because there are a number of diseases associated with bat feces that need to be careful of. But I have been called out on some places where they knew they had bats when the drywall was starting to break apart because of the urine that was coming down on it from the bat colonies. So some of it can get really bad. Um, we want to look at habitat modification and cultural things because that can be very important when you look at a house and the way we build it and the way we want to make it look nice and the ventilations and the things we add to the outside to make it look pretty. A lot of these are the things that provide places for bats to hide or to get access to an attic area. And so that certainly is a habitat modification or cultural. I mentioned the Spanish tiles are one of the nicest things for bats because they can go in the ends of those and get underneath them, and someplace they're going to find a little crack. And it only takes a quarter of an inch crack for a bat to squeeze through it and gain access to an area. You can even just have a place where you've got a small hole in the building, and when the bats squeeze through there and start going in and out, they can actually make it so they can comfortably go in and out. The only way to get rid of bats is to bat-proof a building. And bat-proofing sometimes can be rather expensive. If it's an old building or a building that has some architectural design that can't be changed, then you might have to spend a lot of money to exclude the bats. The best way to find out what you need to do is to observe the area. And the best time to observe it is just before it gets dark. And you locate where the bats are coming in and out, and then you go plug all of the holes that are a quarter inch or smaller except the main hole that they're going in and out of. I'll tell you why in a minute. But you got to plug up all the other holes. Easy way to do it is to use the injectable foam. Injectable foam is most animals won't chew through it. I know it's possible for mice to chew through it, and people mix Brillo pads with it to keep the mice from chewing through. But in the case of bats and the kind of cracks that we're trying to plug up, the injectable foam works real good. If you have a large opening, well then that's when you have to use some kind of lumber, plywood, metal, something like that to plug up a larger area. But injectable foam fills up an awful lot of holes. As I said, leave that main hole open. After dark, when all the bats have had a chance to leave, that's when you plug that main hole temporarily, because the next afternoon you want to go back and open that hole, give any lingering bats a chance to get out of it. But that injectable foam job can be done during the day on all the holes except the one that they're using a lot. You do have to be worried about young bats because you don't want to close up an area that's got bats up in the attic, and then they also have young up there. So certainly when they first come back in the spring, that's when they start having their young, and the young will be in there for a lot of the summer. So if you can't see the area, if you can't get in there to actually observe that there are no young bats, you might want to consider just doing the exclusion in the early spring or late fall. The final exclusion, you can still plug up all the holes except that main entry that you identified. But that main entry, you probably want to wait until they leave on their migration before you plug it up. And then they come back in the spring and they won't be able to get in. There are some bat excluders that are made that allow the bats to get out, but they can't get back in. See, when bats fly out, they go up to their exit and they drop off and then they start flying. When they come back, they land on the side of the building or the cave or the tree or whatever it is, and then they crawl into the hole. Well, these excluders are made so that the bats land, but then they can't get around to where the opening is, so they can't get in. And there's a lot of different ways that can be done. I'll show you one here in a while it's very simple. Some of them are very complicated, unduly complicated, but the principle is the same. They can get out, but can't get back in. Something as simple as a piece of netting over the top of the hole, staple it or tack it at the top so that the bat gets out and he crawls along the edge and drops out and takes off flying. When he comes back, he lands on that netting, but he can't get through it, and they aren't smart enough to go down and go underneath it and crawl back up. So that's a real good way to exclude them. And this is what you usually do in a place where they aren't having some very obvious flight that they're taken in the evenings, or when they're coming out slowly and you're not able to see them all exit at one time. This netting thing, this excluder, is a good way to not let them get back in. Okay, this is acting up again. What's it doing that for? It won't let me advance. Why it keeps doing that?
I think some of the images are hyperlinked to the internet. So when you click on so just
yeah, right, exactly. That might be it. So you think I'm doing it?
Yeah. So if you just, if at all possible, click not on the photo.
Then it won't go to that.
Yeah, ideally.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, all right. I'll make sure I don't do that. All right, now I'm moving along. All right, so the next thing that we want to look at is repellents or frightening devices that are made for bats. Bright lights can be put into an area, and generally, for a short time, the bats will stay away from that area. A lot of it depends on just what other options they have. In many cases, if you put it right into the attic and light that up, they'll just start going around to the back side of some roof rafters where they're not in the bright lights. But if you do have bats that are landing on a porch and they do that for a few nights, sometimes you can turn the lights on out there and that will keep them from coming back and they'll go someplace else. So bright lights can work. Again, mothballs, the vapor that comes from the mothballs makes it unpleasant for bats to be in the area. But you do have to have a lot of them in there, and they have to be replaced often in order for them to work. The ultrasonic devices are easy to sell, but they don't work because, as we all know, bats put out a sonic, I guess you could say, wave in order to direct themselves and to locate prey. People think, well, ultrasonic, that's got to be good for bats. But no, it is not shown to be effective. There's no chemical repellents labeled for bats, and obviously there's no toxicants that we can use because you'd have a bunch of dead bats up in their roosting area. Removal usually isn't an option. Bats would be easy to capture, but then you have to do something with them, and most of them are protected, so it wouldn't work, and you would also have other ones come back. The other thing that's important to remember that if the bats did leave an area, that the guano that is left in the roost will attract other bats. Some people that are trying to get bats to use a bat house will often take some guano and put in there as a way to attract bats to that artificial roost that they've built. So at any rate, removing bats wouldn't work, and they'll come right back if you don't remove the guano anyways. There's some things that we can do for bats that are kind of species specific, and the one that people always want to know about is bat houses. And bat houses are a good thing to do, there's nothing wrong with it, but they will not make bats leave a roost and go someplace else. That's not the way they work. It might not hurt, though, if you were going to exclude bats from an attic and you were able to put up a bat house before you did that, especially if you could take some guano from the attic and put it into that bat house, that then when you do put the exclusion up on your attics, it will then make the bats have a place right away that they can go to, and they don't need to run around looking for a place to stay. They could use that bat house that you put up. So that's another possibility. But keep in mind, bats can roost just about anywhere. Bats will just go up on a tree with bark on it and tuck down into the crotch and stay there. That'll be the place they roost all the time. There's ideal places, the caves and the hollow trees and the attics that they use, but they don't have to have that in order to be protected from the elements. So that's what we have on bats. I've got some things I'd like to show you about the bats that would make it easier to control them. Is that switched over yet?
It's getting ready to.
Okay. Tell me what changes. One monitor doesn't look like it's switched over yet, does it? Did we change it to big, big screen? From big PowerPoint to big screen? There we go, it's on there. You have it switched to that.
Connection.
Momentary delay with our modern technology here. Someone said it looks like the headless wildlife specialist at the table, but this was our compromise of zooming in close enough so you could see things and not so close that you couldn't get the big picture. Anyway, this is the injectable foam. There's several different brands that are available that can be used, and it expands after you squirt it out, and so it does a real good job of plugging up the holes. And that injectable foam is a great invention. We used to talk about stuffing fiberglass to oilskin and tow and all kinds of old things to plug up the little cracks, but that foam works real good. This is an excluder that can be made. It's really no better than that other one that I showed you, except this excluder is made so you could tack it onto the wall. The bats could come out of the hole through here and then drop down. They would come out of the hole here, and then they can drop down and fly away. And yet when they come back, they would run into the screen and wouldn't have any way to get out. So be a little creative. I've even seen someone take a piece of plastic garbage bag and tack it up over the hole, and the bats could get out and they couldn't get back in. So you don't need any of those real expensive deals. Okay, did we get any questions on bats?
Many times people wonder about